President Trump said, "Sometimes you have to walk," noting the talks with North Korea failed because the country was not prepared to do more to end its weapons programs. Hanoi, Vietnam. President Trump and Kim Jong-un, North Korea's leader, abruptly ended their second summit meeting on Thursday after talks collapsed with the two leaders failing to agree on any steps toward nuclear disarmament or measures to ease tensions on the Korean peninsula. "Sometimes you have to walk," Mr. Trump said at an afternoon news conference in Hanoi, the capital of Vietnam. He said Mr. Kim had offered to dismantle the North's most important nuclear facility if the United States lifted the harsh sanctions imposed on his nation, but would not commit to do the same for other elements of its weapons program. That, Mr. Trump said, was a deal-breaker. "It was about the sanctions," Mr. Trump said. "Basically they wanted the sanctions lifted in their entirety, but we couldn't do that." But in a late-night news conference, North Korea's foreign minister, Ri Yong-ho, contradicted Mr. Trump's account, saying the North had asked only for some sanctions to be lifted, those that affect ordinary people, in exchange for permanently and completely dismantling the main facility in the presence of American experts. Given the current level of trust between North Korea and the United States, this was the maximum step for denuclearization we could offer, Mr. Ri told reporters. He added that the North's position would not change. "This kind of opportunity may never come again," he said. The premature end to the negotiations leaves the unusual rapprochement between the United States and North Korea that has unfolded for most of a year at a deadlock, with the North retaining both its nuclear arsenal and facilities believed to be producing additional fissile material for warheads. It also represents a major setback at a difficult political moment for Mr. Trump, who has long presented himself as a tough negotiator capable of bringing adversaries into a deal and had made North Korea the signature diplomatic initiative of his presidency. Even as the talks began, Mr. Trump's longtime lawyer and fixer, Michael D. Cohen, was delivering dramatic and damaging testimony in Congress, accusing him of an expansive pattern of lies and criminality. Mr. Trump had flown across the world to try to work face-to-face with Mr. Kim for the second time, an effort to reduce what American officials regard as one of the world's foremost nuclear threats. Experts estimate that the North has 30 to 60 nuclear warheads as well as intercontinental ballistic missiles that can hit the United States, though it has not demonstrated the technology to protect warheads as they re-enter the atmosphere. Before ending the news conference to fly back to Washington, Mr. Trump tried to put a good face on the outcome. "This wasn't a walk away like you get up and walk out," he said. "No, this was very friendly. We shook hands. There's a warmth that we have and I hope that stays," he added. Mr. Trump said that Mr. Kim had pledged to maintain a halt on nuclear and ballistic missile tests that is now in its 16th month, and that the negotiations would continue. Mr. Ri confirmed the North would not resume testing. But further progress could be difficult now that Mr. Trump has broadcast that he and Mr. Kim have staked out conflicting bottom lines. Both leaders will face greater pressure from hardline officials in their governments to dig in. For Mr. Trump, facing criminal and civil investigations at home, maintaining public support is a growing concern, while Mr. Kim has long used the nuclear program to justify his government's totalitarian rule and explain its weak economy. On his flight leaving Hanoi, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said officials had worked through the previous night and into the morning to come up with terms acceptable to both leaders. When you are dealing with a country that is of the nature of North Korea, it is often the case that only the most senior leaders have the capacity to make those important decisions, he said. "We'll each need to regroup a little bit," he added. Cho Sun-wei, one of the North Korean negotiators, told reporters after the talks collapsed that she feared that Mr. Kim had lost some of his desire to negotiate with the United States. "As I watched the summit meeting, I felt that Chairman Kim appeared to find it hard to understand the American way of calculation," she said. The sticking point turned on what it would take for the North to begin dismantling a central part of its nuclear program, the Yongbyon enrichment facility. According to the Americans, Mr. Kim said he would do so only if all sanctions on his country were lifted. But Mr. Trump and Mr. Pompeo said the North would have to dismantle other parts of its program as well before the United States agreed to such a big concession. In response to a question, Mr. Trump acknowledged for the first time that his administration was aware of a second enrichment site other than Yongbyon, though it was unclear what role that played in the talks. The United States has long insisted that sanctions will be lifted only after North Korea completely dismantles its nuclear program in a verifiable manner. There was talk before the summit meeting, though, that Mr. Trump might agree to ease sanctions in exchange for initial steps toward denuclearization by allowing joint economic projects between North and South Korea.